the metallic taste of blood mixed with dirt. Friedrich Weber pressed his face against the frozen ground as artillery shells tore through what remained of the German defensive line. March 1945. The Rhineland had become a cemetery of steel and flesh, where boys who once dreamed of harvest seasons now dreamed only of surviving the next hour. 28 years old, yet Friedrich felt ancient. His hands, calloused from years working tractors in the fields of Lower Saxony, now trembled as they gripped a rifle he no longer believed in. Around him, teenage soldiers cried for their mothers. The Reich, that promised 1,000 years of glory, was collapsing in less than 12. The sound of American tanks approaching was different from German ones, heavier, more powerful. Friedrich had learned to distinguish these details, the small differences between survival and death. His childhood friend Klaus lay 3 meters away, eyes fixed on nothing, a casualty of the morning bombardment. They had planted wheat together once, laughing about girls from the village. Now Klaus would never plant anything again. Friedrich's village had been reduced to rubble by Allied bombing 2 years prior. His mother's letters, out when they arrived, spoke of hunger, of neighbors frozen to death during winter, of children eating bark from trees. The propaganda posters that once decorated his barracks, showing strong Aryan soldiers conquering inferior enemies, seemed like cruel jokes now. There were no conquests here, only death wearing different uniforms. The order to retreat never came, or perhaps it had, lost in the chaos of collapsing command structures. Friedrich watched as his unit disintegrated. Some soldiers fled east, others west. Many simply dropped their weapons and waited. He remembered the day he was conscripted, how his father had gripped his shoulder and told him to protect the homeland. But what homeland? The farms were destroyed, the cities burned, the people starving. When the American soldiers appeared through the smoke, Friedrich made his choice. He raised his hands slowly, deliberately. The rifle fell to the mud with a soft thud that somehow sounded louder than the artillery. A young American soldier, barely older than the German teenagers dying around them, pointed his weapon at Friedrich's chest. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. But Friedrich saw something unexpected. Not hatred, but exhaustion. They were all tired of death. The march to the prisoner collection point took 6 hours. Friedrich walked among hundreds of other German soldiers, a river of grey uniforms flowing toward an uncertain future. Some men wept. Others stared ahead with empty expressions, their minds already casualties of the war. Friedrich felt something different. Relief mixed with shame. Relief that the fighting was over. Shame that he felt relieved. They loaded the prisoners onto trucks heading west, deeper into Allied territory. Through the canvas covering, Friedrich caught glimpses of German towns occupied by American forces. What struck him most was not the destruction, but the efficiency. American supply convoys moved with mechanical precision. Soldiers distributed food to civilians. There was organization where German administration had dissolved into chaos. As the truck crossed into France, Friedrich realized he was leaving Germany for the first time in his life. Not as the conquering soldier the propaganda had promised, but as a prisoner. The irony wasn't lost on him. He closed his eyes and thought of home, of the smell of fresh soil after rain, of his mother's bread. He didn't know if he would ever smell these things again. The real battle, Friedrich was beginning to understand, wasn't behind him. It was ahead. The ship swayed for 17 days across the Atlantic. Friedrich had never seen the ocean before the war, and now it surrounded him, endless and indifferent. Below deck, hundreds of German prisoners shared the cramped space, their bodies pressed together, the air thick with the smell of unwashed men and seasickness. Some prisoners spoke of escape, of returning to Germany. Friedrich remained silent. Return to what? When the Statue of Liberty appeared on the horizon, several prisoners rushed to the small portholes. Friedrich watched their faces transform from curiosity to something darker. The symbol of American freedom mocked them, prisoners of a war they had lost, defending a regime many had stopped believing in. One older soldier, a man named Ernst, who had fought in the First War too, spat on the floor and muttered about American hypocrisy. Friedrich said nothing, but privately wondered if the statue represented something he had never truly possessed. The processing center in New York was efficient, almost mechanical. American soldiers photographed them, assigned numbers, distributed clean clothes. Friedrich became prisoner 4847G. The clothes were clean, better quality than the threadbare uniform he had worn for the past year. This small detail unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Even as prisoners, they were better fed and clothed than German soldiers had been in the final months of the war. 3 days later, Friedrich found himself on a train heading west. Through the window, America unfolded like a propaganda film, except this was real. Cities with intact buildings and lit windows, farms with machinery he had only seen in technical manuals, people on platforms who barely glanced at the train carrying enemy soldiers. Life continued here, untouched by the destruction that had consumed Europe. The train stopped in a rural town in Iowa. Friedrich and 20 other prisoners were loaded onto trucks and driven through countryside that reminded him painfully of home. Rolling fields, scattered farmhouses, the smell of livestock. But everything here seemed larger, more prosperous. The fences were intact, the barns freshly painted. No bomb craters interrupted the fields. The Müller farm appeared at sunset. A 2-story white house, several barns, fields extending to the horizon. An older man with grey hair and stern features waited by the main gate. Johann Müller wore work clothes, but stood with the bearing of someone who had built something substantial. His eyes swept over the prisoners with neither hatred nor sympathy, only practical assessment, as if evaluating livestock. "You will work," he said in German, his accent familiar yet foreign, shaped by decades in America. "You work hard. You eat well. You cause problems. You go to a camp with bars and armed guards. Simple," the other prisoners murmured among themselves. Friedrich studied Johann's face, trying to understand this man who spoke his language, but clearly wasn't one of them anymore. Behind Johann, a woman appeared on the porch, his wife, presumably. She held a dish towel and watched them with an expression Friedrich couldn't decipher. That night, sleeping in the converted barn with the other prisoners, Friedrich stared at the wooden ceiling. The bed was simple but clean. His stomach was full for the first time in months. Outside, he could hear crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. He thought of Klaus, dead in the mud of the Rhineland. He thought of his mother, probably hungry in the rubble of their village. And he wondered what kind of country fed its enemies better than Germany had fed its own soldiers. The work began before sunrise. Friedrich's body remembered the rhythm of farm labor, even after years of war. His hands, which had forgotten gentleness holding weapons, relearned it touching soil and machinery. The Müller farm operated with American efficiency, modern tractors, irrigated fields, organized schedules. Everything his village had dreamed of possessing before the war destroyed those dreams. Johann Müller supervised them with silent intensity. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried weight. Friedrich noticed how the other prisoners avoided him, sensing the resentment that radiated from the old man like heat from summer pavement. Only Friedrich seemed curious rather than intimidated. On the third morning, a tractor broke down in the east field. The American mechanic Johann had called wouldn't arrive until the following week. Friedrich watched Johann stare at the disabled machine with frustration evident in every line of his weathered face. Without speaking, Friedrich approached and opened the engine compartment. "You know tractors?" Johann asked, his tone skeptical. "I maintained them before the war. My father owned a small farm." Johann said nothing, but stepped aside. Friedrich worked for 2 hours, his hands moving with the confidence of old knowledge. When the engine roared to life, Johann's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not quite respect, but recognition. That evening, Johann invited Friedrich to the main house. The other prisoners watched with jealous confusion as Friedrich followed the old man across the yard. Inside, the house smelled of cooking meat and bread. Real bread, not the sawdust mixture Germans had eaten during the final war years. Friedrich's mouth watered involuntarily. Johann poured 2 glasses of water and sat across from Friedrich at the kitchen table. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Through the window, the Iowa sunset painted the fields gold, the same color Friedrich remembered from harvest seasons in Lower Saxony. "I left Germany in 1920, Johann finally said. "After the First War destroyed everything. I was 19, angry, hungry. I swore I would never return." Friedrich listened, sensing this wasn't a conversation, but a confession that needed witnessing. "I built this farm with my hands. My wife and I, we worked 20 hours daily for years. No government helped us. No party promised us glory, just work and freedom to keep what we earned." Johann's voice hardened. "Then your generation started another war. You burned Europe again. For what? For a madman's dream of superiority." The accusation hung between them like smoke. Friedrich wanted to defend himself, to explain he had only wanted to protect his family, that he never believed the propaganda, but the words felt hollow before they reached his mouth. He had worn the uniform. He had carried the rifle. Intentions didn't absolve actions. "My brother died in that first war," Johann continued, "killed by German artillery in France. He was 16. Now you come here, and I'm supposed to forget, supposed to see you as just another farmhand." "I don't ask you to forget," Friedrich said quietly. "I cannot forget either. My friend Klaus died last month. My village is rubble. My brother died defending Berlin." He paused. "We were told we fought for Germany's future, but there is no future there now. Only graves and hunger." Johann studied him with eyes that had seen too much loss to offer easy forgiveness. But perhaps, Friedrich thought, understanding was enough to begin with. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late May. Friedrich recognized his mother's handwriting immediately, the careful script now shaky with age or hunger or both. He sat on his bunk while the other prisoners worked, hands trembling as he opened the envelope that had traveled across an ocean and a war's aftermath. The words struck harder than any artillery shell. His younger brother, Martin, had died defending the Reich Chancellery in Berlin's final days. 17 years old, conscripted in the desperate final months when Germany was feeding children into the meat grinder. His mother's grief bled through every sentence. The village remained destroyed. Food was scarce. Former neighbors accused each other of collaboration or resistance, tearing apart what little community survived. Friedrich folded the letter carefully and stared at his calloused hands. Martin had been 8 years old when Friedrich was conscripted, a boy who collected insects and dreamed of becoming a teacher. Now he was ash in Berlin's ruins, sacrificed for a Reich that lasted 12 years instead of 1,000. That afternoon, Friedrich worked mechanically, his mind elsewhere. Johann noticed but said nothing. The other prisoners gave him space, recognizing the particular grief of distant bad news. Only during the evening meal did Friedrich's isolation break. Tom Anderson appeared at the barn as the prisoners finished eating. 23 years old, he was Johann's neighbor's son, recently returned from fighting in France. He wore his American uniform casually, without the rigid militarism Friedrich associated with soldiers. Tom brought cigarettes and chocolate, luxuries the prisoners hadn't tasted in years. "My grandfather came from Bavaria in 1889, Tom said in broken German, sitting on a hay bale. "He told me stories about the old country, mountains, festivals, good beer." He smiled sadly. "He died before this war started. Maybe that was a mercy." Friedrich accepted a cigarette. The American tobacco smooth and rich compared to the ersatz German cigarettes of recent years. Tom spoke about his grandfather's journey to America, about building a life from nothing, about becoming American while remembering being German. "Did you believe it?" Tom asked suddenly. "The superiority thing, the master race." The directness was typically American, Friedrich had learned. No European subtlety, just honest questions demanding honest answers. He thought carefully before responding. "I believed I was protecting my home," Friedrich said slowly. "The propaganda, it was everywhere. In schools, newspapers, radio. After a while, you stop questioning because questioning is dangerous." He paused. "But believing and understanding are different. I never understood the hatred, the camps, the killing of civilians. That wasn't protecting Germany. That was something else." Tom nodded, pulling out photographs. His unit had liberated a concentration camp in April. He didn't show Friedrich the images, but described them. The skeletal bodies, the ovens, the systematic industrialization of murder. Friedrich had heard rumors during the war, whispers that soldiers dismissed as enemy propaganda. "We did that," Friedrich whispered. "Your government did that in your name." The distinction felt meaningless. Friedrich had worn the uniform of the regime that built those camps. He had fought for the government that operated them. The weight of collective guilt pressed down on him like physical force. That night, Friedrich couldn't sleep. He thought about Martin dying for a lie, about Johann's brother killed in the First War, about the millions dead because men like Friedrich had followed orders without sufficient resistance. He thought about the abundance of America, the casual freedom, the absence of fear, and he wondered if choosing survival over principle made him a coward or simply human. Some had transformed the Iowa landscape into something almost unbearably beautiful. The fields turned golden, the air hummed with life, and Friedrich found himself noticing details he had ignored during the war years. The pattern of clouds, the smell of rain on dry earth, the way light changed throughout the day. The transformation inside him was slower, more painful, like bones healing after a break. Johann's old farm tractor had been broken for 3 weeks, a mechanical problem that stumped even the American mechanic. Parts were expensive, and Johann was considering selling it for scrap. Friedrich asked permission to examine it. For 2 days, he worked alone in the equipment barn, disassembling the engine, improvising solutions with available materials. When the tractor roared to life on the 3rd morning, Johann stood in the barn doorway watching. Friedrich shut off the engine and wiped grease from his hands. "In Germany, we learned to make things work with nothing," Friedrich said. "The blockades, the shortages. We became experts at improvisation." "Necessity," Johann replied. "But here, you have options. You can fix things properly, not just temporarily." The metaphor wasn't subtle, but Friedrich appreciated it nonetheless. His relationship with the Müller family shifted gradually. Johann's wife, Helena, began including him in family dinners. Their daughter, Anna, recently returned from nursing school, taught him English phrases in the evenings. The other prisoners noticed Friedrich's special treatment with resentment and suspicion. Some called him a collaborator. Others simply envied the privileges. Friedrich didn't care. He was learning something more valuable than English or mechanical skills. He was learning what normal life felt like without the constant shadow of authoritarianism. One Sunday, the Müllers invited him to town. Friedrich had expected another work assignment, but instead found himself at a community church picnic. Families gathered on blankets. Children played baseball. People laughed freely without glancing over their shoulders for informants or party officials. The casualness of their freedom was almost offensive to someone who had lived under constant surveillance. Tom Anderson found Friedrich standing alone by a tree, watching the scene with the intensity of an anthropologist studying an alien culture. "Strange, isn't it?" Tom said. "All this normal life while Europe is still burying bodies." "I spent years believing America was weak," Friedrich admitted. "Soft, decadent, inferior. The propaganda showed fat capitalists exploiting workers, a democracy too chaotic to function." He gestured at the picnic. "But this is what we were supposedly fighting to protect Germany from. Freedom, prosperity, choice. You didn't fight for that. You fought for something else entirely." Friedrich nodded slowly. "I fought because I was told to fight, because refusing meant death or prison, because I believed protecting my village required destroying yours." He paused. "I was wrong about everything." A baseball rolled to Friedrich's feet. A young boy, perhaps 7 years old, ran over to retrieve it. The child smiled at Friedrich without fear, said "Thanks, mister" in cheerful English, and ran back to the game. Such a small moment. Such a profound demonstration of what Friedrich had never experienced in Germany. A child who didn't fear strangers in uniform, who hadn't been taught to denounce his neighbors, who could simply be a child. That night, lying in his bunk, Friedrich made a decision that terrified and liberated him simultaneously. He didn't want to go back to Germany. Not now. Possibly not ever. September brought the harvest and another letter. This one bore official stamps and multiple forwarding addresses, as if it had searched for Friedrich across continents. His mother's handwriting was weaker now. The letters slanted with exhaustion or illness. She was alive. His sister, Greta, had survived. But the news carried the weight of impossible choices. His mother begged him to return. The farm, what remained of it, needed men to rebuild. Greta had married a local boy who lost his leg in Russia. They struggled to work the damaged land with broken tools and depleted soil. His mother's health was failing. Winter approached, and they had insufficient food stored. She needed her son. Germany needed its sons to return and resurrect what the war had killed. Friedrich read the letter 3 times, each reading adding layers to his guilt. He sat in the equipment barn, surrounded by functioning American machinery, his stomach full of Helena's cooking, while his family starved in rubble-strewn fields he had once called home. Johann found him there as sunset painted the Iowa sky in colors that reminded Friedrich painfully of Lower Saxony autumns. "Bad news?" Johann asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "My mother wants me to come home, to help rebuild." Johann sat on a workbench, his weathered face thoughtful. "Home. Strange word. I left my home 45 years ago. This is my home now." He paused. "But my mother begged me to return too. Said Germany needed its sons after the First War." "You didn't go back?" "No. I had already buried too many people because of German nationalism. I wasn't going to bury myself there too." Johann's eyes hardened. "Your mother wants you to rebuild. Rebuild what? The farms? The cities? Or the same thinking that caused 2 wars in 30 years? The question struck Friedrich like a physical blow. He had been so focused on filial duty that he hadn't considered the deeper implications. Returning to Germany meant more than farming. It meant existing within a society that had perpetrated unthinkable horrors, a culture that needed more than physical reconstruction. "She's my mother," Friedrich said quietly. "She raised me. Sacrificed for me. What kind of son abandons his family? The kind who understands that some cycles must break." Johann stood, his joints creaking with age and labor. "I love Germany, its music, its forests, its culture, but I don't love what Germany became. Twice now it has tried to devour Europe. Twice it has failed. How many times before Germans admit the problem isn't everyone else?" That evening, Friedrich couldn't eat. He walked the farm's perimeter as darkness fell, wrestling with competing loyalties. His mother's face haunted him, aged and hungry. But so did Martin's ghost, 17 years old and dead for a regime that had promised glory and delivered ash. Tom found him by the creek, smoking a cigarette in the darkness. "Heard you got news from home," Tom said, sitting beside him. "My family needs me. My mother is sick." "They're starving." "So go back." Friedrich looked at him sharply. "You think I should?" "I think you should do what you can live with." Tom exhaled smoke into the night air. "My grandfather said leaving Germany was the hardest thing he ever did. Also said it was the best thing. Sometimes the right choice and the easy choice aren't the same." Friedrich thought about the church picnic, the child retrieving the baseball without fear, the casual freedom of American life. He thought about Germany's ruins, built on the graves of millions. He thought about his mother's handwriting, growing weaker with each letter, and he realized that some decisions destroy you regardless of what you choose. Winter arrived early in Iowa, bringing with it a cold that reminded Friedrich of German winters, though here the cold came with heated barns and sufficient food. The harvest had been successful. The Müllers celebrated with a dinner that would have fed Friedrich's entire village for a week. Friedrich had written 3 letters to his mother. All 3 remained unmailed, hidden beneath his mattress like evidence of a crime he couldn't commit. The other German prisoners were being processed for repatriation. By spring, most would return to Germany, to occupied zones divided between victors, to cities learning new masters. Some prisoners spoke excitedly of going home. Others talked quietly of suicide, preferring death to facing what they had left behind. Friedrich said nothing. His silence grew heavier with each passing day. On Christmas Eve, Johann invited Friedrich to the main house. Snow fell softly outside, and inside, a decorated tree stood in the corner, lights twinkling with electricity that still seemed magical to Friedrich. Helena had prepared a feast. Anna played piano, filling the house with music that transcended language. After dinner, Johann poured 2 glasses of whiskey and led Friedrich to his study. Photographs covered one wall. Johann as a young immigrant, His early struggling farm, his wedding, his children growing up American, a life built deliberately, far from German soil. I spoke with the authorities, Johann said. The repatriation isn't mandatory. Prisoners can apply for work permits, eventually citizenship. The process takes years and isn't guaranteed. But it's possible. Friedrich's heart accelerated. The unspoken possibility, now spoken, became terrifyingly real. I cannot pay you what American workers earn, Johann continued. But I can sponsor your application. You're a good mechanic, a hard worker. America needs people who know how to build, not destroy. My mother will understand or won't, but she'll survive either way. Germans are survivors. We're good at that, even when we're not good at much else. Johann's expression softened slightly. I was angry when you arrived. Angry at what your generation did to my homeland again. But you're not your government. You're just a man trying to figure out how to live with what you've seen and done. Friedrich stared at his rough hands, hands that had held weapons and plows, that had killed and created. I don't know if I deserve this choice. Deserve? Johann laughed bitterly. Nobody deserves anything. We just live with our choices and hope we can sleep at night. That night, Friedrich finally wrote the letter he could mail. He told his mother the truth, that he loved her, that he hoped she would forgive him, but that he couldn't return to Germany. That the country he had fought for no longer existed, and the country that would replace it needed to be built by people who hadn't left. That his own rebuilding required different soil. He mailed it the next morning, feeling simultaneously liberated and damned. Spring came slowly to Iowa. Friedrich worked the fields as applications processed through bureaucratic systems. Tom taught him better English. Anna helped him understand American customs. The Müllers didn't treat him as family, but they treated him as someone who might become family eventually. One morning in April, Friedrich stood in the east field, watching the sun rise over land he was learning to call home. The tractor he had repaired worked perfectly, ready for planting season.